In this video, let's take a look at Holy Week and how the early church celebrated it. Holy Week has been called the Great Week in the Christian calendar. It is the most extraordinary week in the Christian calendar because it goes from Palm Sunday, when we celebrate the arrival and the celebration of Jesus coming into Jerusalem and arriving and being celebrated as a king, to the Last Supper on Thursday, to Good Friday, and to ultimately the resurrection on Easter Sunday. And this is a week in which the redemption of the world happened, and the entire recreation of the world began. God's resurrection power and God's saving and recreating power began on Easter Sunday. So now let's take a look at how the early church celebrated Holy Week. On Sunday, they first assembled on the Mount of Olives, and they sang, on Palm Sunday, they sang while holding palms and branches in their hands, and they prayed throughout the evening while they were there, and they concluded in prayer in front of an erected cross for this occasion. In other words, they had a cross brought in on this Sunday in which they prayed in. And then Monday through Thursday, they continued by singing, praying, and reading together. They got together and celebrated in worship in times of confession and repentance and preparation for what was to come. So for Sunday through Wednesday, they were very active. And then they move into Thursday, which is also called Maundy Thursday or Holy Thursday. And there they celebrate with a communion and worship throughout the night. They had a communion to represent the Last Supper, since Jesus had a Last Supper with his disciples. And on Friday, early in the morning, they visited Gethsemane, and they prayed with weeping and remorse for their sins and shortcomings, recreating the Garden of Gethsemane event with Jesus. And then at the nighttime, a cross was put on a table. And people walked by, and as they passed by, they touched the cross, first with their head, then their eyes, and then with their lips. They kissed it. And after touching the cross and all that, they moved on from the service. And then on Saturday, there were two worship gatherings. And the very last one was usually a reenactment of the resurrection event, recreating and remembering the actual, and reenacting bodily the events of the Passion, a lot like our Easter services or reenactments that we do today. Then on Sunday, they had a celebratory worship service. But here's the thing. The odd thing about the Holy Week is that it was a week-long event where they prepared for the crucifixion and resurrection for Christ. But here's the thing. On Sunday, it didn't end. It continued for 8 more days. For 8 days, for 8 consecutive days afterwards, the festivities and the celebration continued, and they continued in worship as they celebrated the resurrection of Jesus Christ and the life that was now available through him and through God's grace and available to all. They continued for 8 days to celebrate the resurrection. So it was really like 2 weeks. 1 week, the Holy Week, where all the events happened, and then a week afterwards where they celebrate the outcome of the resurrection of Jesus Christ.